Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Today we're going to be talking about education, which is always a huge issue that comes up during the Idaho legislative session. It's almost as if, to the risk of sounding conspiratorial, some people look at education as the key to the future. In other words, if we can teach these young minds what to think or pretty much how to think, then we can stay in control. There's that definite feel. But three bills have come to the Idaho legislature that are, in a word, not good. Okay, two words. We'll talk about what those bills are and why they should not pass right after this.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I know it sounds really bad to suggest that, someone might want to use the education system to indoctrinate kids or to otherwise shape those young minds so that basically you have them for life. And I really believe there are people who are like that. Now, the vast majority of people, I believe, who get involved in the education system, from legislators on down to teachers and even parents, probably have the best interests of the child in mind. But sometimes the way that they go about accomplishing those child's best interests aren't necessarily getting the best results. And here are three bills that are perfect examples of why that is so. The first, we're going to be drawing from an article here from Idaho Freedom Foundation President Ron Nate. Three very icky education bills. Now, I was looking at each one of these bills and specifically going through the Idaho Freedom Index and looking at why they received negative scores and in what they were accomplishing. So I'm going to intersperse some of Ron's comments as well as Samuel Lair's analysis of these bills. But as you can see, there are some problems with each one of them. We're going to start with, this is Senate Bill 1145, an early literacy readiness program. Now, you'll notice right off the bat, this got a -1. So the bill description is Senate Bill 1145 would allow school districts or public charter schools to use existing literacy intervention funds for an early literacy readiness program for children ages 4 and 5. I mean, that kind of sounds like we're talking about pre-kindergarten, right? I mean, that's the impression I'm getting here. Nonetheless, we have to start with the question, does it expand, create, or enlarge any agency, board, program, function, or activity of government? Or does it eliminate or curtail the size or scope of government? Well, this bill would expand the early literacy readiness program to allow school districts and charter schools to use literacy intervention funds for pre-K children ages 4 and 5. Now, let's find out why that's not such a great idea, because as Ron points out in his article, Senate Bill S 1145 is actually a backdoor attempt at creating pre-K education programs. Ever younger, we're going to, start the government educating them. For decades, the Idaho legislature has opposed extending public education to include pre-K ages and even into the realm of daycare for early childhood education. Pre-K is not a popular education topic in the Capitol, he says. In fact, if you think about it, the concept of kindergarten was the original extension of public education into early childhood education. So the first grade is to be indeed, or it used to be, the first grade. But now kindergarten is so ingrained that it's actually taken for granted to be part of the standard public education system. Now, expanding public education is not what we need. Ron says, in 2017, the legislature created the K through 3rd Reading Initiative Program with a $9 million appropriation. Get this. Since then, that program's budget has increased every year to over $72 million. Care to guess where the outcomes have been? Well, they've stayed level at best. So since the program started, only around 32% of third graders are proficient at grade level, and that number's not increasing. So the outcomes are awful, the public education system is broken, and the Senate is considering adding pre-K education to its list of responsibilities. And this bill promises to increase spending each year with little or no accountability. That's not what we need to fix education here in Idaho. Fortunately, this bill died earlier today in a Senate vote. The nays were 21, the ayes were 14. As this tweet from the Idaho Freedom Foundation points out, Senate Bill 1145, which would redirect funds to the early literacy program, failed the Senate in that vote. Now, this is good news because the program costs taxpayers $72.8 million a year, yet has shown no significant improvements in improving literacy. So let's move on to the next one. This is Senate Bill 1147, outcomes-based funding. Here's the question that has to be asked, and you'll notice this one gets a strike against it as well. Does it increase government spending for objectionable purposes or for debt? Conversely, does it decrease government spending or debt? Well, Senate Bill 1147 would increase spending on K through 12 education by an additional $35 million. Now, while the concept of outcomes-based funding is promising, it should be applied to existing funding, not adding to an already bloated, inefficient education budget. And here's how Ron sums it up. He says, Senate Bill S 1147 introduces a new public education funding mechanism for outcomes-based funding. He says, take it from us at the Idaho Freedom Foundation, public education doesn't need new funding. If the legislature truly wants accountability in public education, school choice is the best option. Short of that, making existing funding dependent on achieving certain outcomes seems a reasonable step. But when asked about why the need for new funding, all the sponsor that Senator Lent could say was, well, it's because the governor included $35 million in his budget for outcomes-based funding. So just because. I mean, the money's there, why don't we go ahead and spend it? I'm sorry, but that's kind of a common attitude. So Ron says, look, we're spending over $3 billion on public education. This bill says we need another $35 million to incentivize better outcomes. Finally, he says, note that the outcomes include graduation rates, something easily manipulated by schools, which can waive certain requirements or even reduce requirements to increase their outcomes without actually improving education. Now, as of today, March 11th, the Senate is holding this bill on its final reading calendar. All right, one more bill to go. This is Senate Bill 1069, literacy intervention. This one absolutely had me shaking my head. Senate Bill 1069 will require the Idaho Department of Education to provide professional development for all kindergarten through grade 3 teachers and elementary administrators in the science of reading and evidence-based best practices. You can see this one has a strike against it as well. Where do we begin? Ron says, okay, Senate Bill S 1069 spends $5 million a year to begin a 3-year cycle for all kindergarten through grade 3 teachers and elementary administrators to receive training in the science of reading while sustaining ongoing training. In other words, $15 million in new spending and training for our teachers to employ scientifically proven reading techniques, in other words, phonics. Doesn't our K through 12 public education system already have the prime directive of teaching kids to read, write, do math, know history? Reading is a fundamental skill that we expect education to provide already. I mean, that's their job. Nonetheless, the idea here is we should not be creating new initiatives and new budget line items to pay for what teachers already should be doing. The $3.3 billion that we outlay each year for education in the state should be sufficient to pay for a program or to incentivize teachers to do the job they were hired to do. Now, if the teachers lack the skills to teach reading, then maybe the teachers should be replaced with those who do have the skills. It's a time-honored tradition in government bureaus, Ron says. Always be growing, always be spending. Well, here we have 3 very icky education bills to pile on more programs and more spending to a system that has tripled its budget in the last 15 years. And the kicker is that all this time, the student proficiencies have remained stagnant. When will the legislature ever say enough is enough? That's some harsh truth. I get it. You know, this may be painful truth to some people, but this is the reason why we need to hold the line and not just, well, if we just throw some more money and maybe some more good intentions at it, this is going to solve the problem. Not necessarily. So again, with all respect to those who bring these bills forward, and I know that in their hearts they want to help, but sometimes they're not looking at the bigger picture and applying, you know, the bigger questions of, is this really proper for government to do, or are we getting the proper outcomes that we should be getting on what we're already spending? And if the answer is no, then why spend more money on that? All right, one final notation here. I just wanted to point out that Capitol Clarity is coming up this Thursday. I hope you'll tune in or attend. If you're in Boise, stop into the Lincoln Auditorium at noon to 1 p.m. at the Idaho State Capitol. Blake Kanzati, who's president of the Idaho Family Policy Center, will be there talking about defending traditional family values. If you want to take this in from elsewhere, you can check it out on the Idaho Freedom Foundation's YouTube channel, as well as other social media channels. It's well worth your time. You want to see some of the people who are helping to shape influence and shape policy in the state. Here is a great opportunity. Look, we all want our kids to be productive, educated, thinking, reasoning individuals, right? Okay. I think most of us do. But sometimes the good intentions aren't enough to justify this bill or that bill. And so please, don't take it as, well, they're just attacking public education or they're attacking, the idea of education. No, I think we all want the same thing, but how we go about it is important, because if we're using government in ways that are either unwise or, for that matter, outside the proper scope of its operations, we're really not doing any favors, but we're spending a lot of taxpayer money and not getting the results that we need. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.